Good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Scores Back event here with the ACT Online Prep Live, featuring the ACT and Kaplan. So you've taken the ACT, you've got your scores back, and in this hour, we're going to walk you through your score report, make sure that you understand all the components of it, and then also help you make some decisions, like, should I take the ACT again? Should I stick with my score? What's the risk and reward on it? And so hopefully after this hour, you'll feel a lot more confident about making these decisions and less unsure and feeling like there's less guesswork about your next steps from here. So with that in mind, let me introduce you to myself and my team here. My name is Boris. I'll be your on-camera teacher for the next hour. But if you've been to any of our other events for Online Prep Live, you know that I'm not the only teacher here, far from it. So we got some amazing teachers here. David's here, Carrie, Joe, and Heather, all of whom will be answering your questions throughout the chat. So if you have any questions, please ask as the event goes along, and they'll be happy to entertain them. Also want to give a shout out to Chris and Greg, who are behind the scenes, making sure that all the technology works and that nothing blows up at any point throughout this presentation. So with that in mind, let's get started. The goal of this session is first and foremost to explain to you what your scores mean. So after today, you'll have a much better sense of what was my score? Is it good? Was it bad? What are all these numbers in my score report? I'm also going to help you make a concrete decision about whether it's a good idea for you to retake the ACT. Most people who make that call do it based on guesswork or gut feelings, but there really is kind of a science to it. So I'll explain to you how to make that decision, and you can feel really good about it. Also, for those of you who do want to retake the ACT and want to do some prep, I'll discuss with you the ACT Online Prep Live program. So this is the prep course made by Kaplan and the makers of the ACT. It is a really great resource, and it's something that you may want to consider. So if you have been weighing in your mind whether you want to take that program with us, then I'll give you an insight into some of the features and help you decide if that's the kind of thing that you want to do as you prepare for your next run through the ACT. All right, so let me know in the chat real quick. Why did you take the ACT? So who did you feel like you were taking the test for? Some people feel like, well, I'm just taking it, because I have to for college. Some people feel like they take it because their parents or their teachers pressured them into it. And some people just do it out of a sense of pride, like they just want to do well in the ACT, and the fact that it gets them into college or whatever is just sort of secondary in a way. My advice to you, if you're going to be taking the ACT again, is to try to frame the perspective as much as possible for choice D here. Whether it was your parents or your teachers or the college admissions officers who initially pushed you into taking the ACT, if you're going to do it again, now that you're here, I really want to make this about you. Because a really great ACT score can open up some doors and have some really great benefits. It can get you into the college of your choice, obviously, but it can also get you some really sweet scholarships. A lot of schools have scholarships based around a high ACT or SAT score, and those are life-changing. So for me personally, I did get a 90th percentile score, which is what my college required to give a full tuition scholarship. And so that ended up saving me about $86,000 at the end of the day, but by the time I graduated 4 years later. So just to put this into perspective, when I graduated, I had about $12,000 in debt, which I was able to pay off in a couple of years. If I had had $86,000 more dollars in debt, so 98 total $1,000, I'm 31, I'm going to turn 32 next month on June 15 is my birthday, I would still be paying off about $500 in debt payments every single month. So I've been out of college for, over 10 years. That's a huge difference. And, now 31, soon to be 32-year-old me is extremely grateful for what 17-year-old me did back when he decided, because his parents forced him to, let's not kid ourselves, to take the test again and work a little bit harder and prep at it a little bit more the second time. And that's really like one of the single most important things I ever did in my life, and I had no idea at the time how important it was going to be. So scholarships are real. It's in a way almost even more important than getting into college in the first place, because you got to be able to pay off the debt when you graduate. And so it's just a huge deal. So whether you're here because your parents are making you be here or because somebody told you that you had to be here and it's just some chore that you're getting through, really focus on the benefit that a good ACT score can have for you, and that way you'll be more motivated and more encouraged to really work hard and get the score that you deserve ultimately on test day. So I see some answers coming in. Rhonda's saying, Rhonda wants bright futures and get money to pay for college. Rhonda, you are ahead of where I was when I was 17 years old. So Mad props to you. That's exactly how you got to be thinking about this preparation process. I saw also a comment from Robert. Robert said, for myself and to secure a chance at going to a good college. All right, you guys have your heads in the right places. This is fantastic. Now, I'm assuming you've already taken the ACT. Today's event is about, you're getting your scores back and what they mean. So let's talk a little bit about your scores. All right, the ACT is a test. And one other test that you may have had to deal with at some point in your life, not in the too distant past, was the test to get your driver's license. So let's compare these two tests, right? Both very common tests. Both are tests that just about everybody goes through. The thing about the ACT is that it's not pass-fail. One of the most common questions that we get is, what's a good ACT score? And whenever an ACT teacher is asked that question, we always have to give runaround answers, because honestly, the answer is, it depends. I'll talk a little bit more later about how to figure out what a good score is for you, but there is no universal good score. So while the driver's license test is either, yay, you passed, now you can drive, or no, you didn't pass, so you're not allowed to drive, the ACT is a lot more complicated than that, and you shouldn't expect going in to get one simple, clear, universal answer for what is a good score. So we'll get there. Let's start then by checking out the score report itself. All right, we're going to have to keep in mind two things as we look at the score report. One is this score good enough to get me into the school of my choice? I'll explain to you how to make that judgment call. But the other is, does this school suggest that if I do go to college, I will be successful there? And you may be surprised. The ACT is actually a pretty good reflection of future success, or success in your first year of college as a freshman. And so I'll show you the numbers and help you get a sense of how much more, or how much more you don't need to practice as you continue on. All right, so here's your score report. We're going to start here, and we'll come back to it. We'll look at all the different areas. For now, I just want to focus on a couple of main things. Number one, today we'll be spending a little bit of time looking at what you see down here, the PDF score summary. And I recommend checking that out because it actually is really nice. It has a good interface, and it shows you everything kind of in one clear image. So we'll take a look at that later, and you'll see what it's like. Of course, your eye is going to be drawn to this composite score at the top. This is the most important score by far. So this is the number one thing that matters for colleges. Obviously, there's some other stuff that matters as well, and we'll talk about it. But that's going to be the first thing that you see. Now, the mistake a lot of people make is they look at the composite score, they go, yay, I like it, or boo, I'm sad, and then they never look at the score report again. And that's a shame, because there's some other useful information here in the score report, and I want to take you on a little tour and show you some of the other things. So, first of all, let's take a look at the ACT and how it compares to your freshman year of college. No matter what you major in, if you go to a typical university in the United States, and by typical I mean you'd have to work a little bit hard to find some niche schools in order for this not to be the case. But at a typical college in the US, you're going to take some kind of a composition class as a freshman. You're going to take some kind of a math class. Which math class you take depends on your major. And it also depends on the school that you go to. So here it says college algebra, but at my school, Case Western, very much a nerd school. Even people who were in the humanities actually had to pass either calculus, statistics, or introduction to logic. So that's quite a step up from algebra. So you may have to do some advanced math your first year, but at minimum you'll be doing some kind of algebra. And so then there's going to be some kind of a social science class for sure. Could be history, could be something else, and you're going to have to pass a science credit at some point. There's no avoiding it. And you can see this is why the ACT is the way it is. The 4 different tests of the ACT are pretty much designed to mirror the main things that you'll be taking your first year as a college freshman, regardless of what your major is. Now, there's a good question here from Deepak that quite a few of my colleagues have already answered, but I wanted to answer it on camera because it's such a good question. What's the best way you would suggest to improve an ACT score? It's a really good question. And my honest answer would be to take a class of some sort. The reason that that's nice is that when you have a schedule, when you have somebody telling you, like, here's what you should do and here's when you should do it, when you have somebody explaining things, it's both a lot easier to learn the material than trying to learn it on your own from a book. And it's also nice to have someone kicking your butt a little bit so that you're actually more motivated to prep. So because a class gives you the motivation and it makes the material more digestible, it's always my number one suggestion. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the class later on that we offer here with the ACT, the official makers of the test, ACT Online Prep Live it's called. And it's not only very affordable, but also if you do have a fee waiver for the ACT, so if you're low income and you normally might think that a class like with live teachers would be out of reach, Online Prep Live is actually completely free. It's $0 for anyone who qualifies for an ACT fee waiver. So it's a really cool program. We're very proud of it, both the ACT and Kaplan, to be able to offer live prep at an affordable price for students. So that would be my suggestion. Failing that, definitely a book, because you want to learn the strategies for answering the questions, and you want to have a lot of practice problems to work off of. So what the ACT did was look at how students do on each of these 4 sections of the test, and then follow up and see how well those same students did the freshman year. Now, if you do that with a large enough number of students and you get a statistically significant sample size, it actually becomes possible to predict how likely is it that somebody who gets a certain score on the section of the ACT would pass the corresponding class their freshman year. And I personally think this is kind of cool. These are what's called the college readiness benchmarks. I know when you see this phrase on your score report, it's very, very tempting to just be like, college readiness benchmark, I don't know what that is, and just forget about it. But it's actually a very simple concept. It's basically, what score do you need to get on that section of the ACT in order to be likely to get a B or a C in the corresponding class your freshman year? By the way, if you guys are wondering, what does it mean to be likely to get a B or a C? That means you have a 50% chance of getting a B or higher and a 75% chance of getting C or higher. So it's not 100%. There were people who hit these benchmarks and still didn't get a C, but it's a likelihood indicator. For English, the benchmark is 18. So that means that if you can get an 18 at least on your ACT English test, you are likely to pass a typical American college freshman year college composition class. The other benchmarks are higher. So for math and for reading, the corresponding benchmark is 22, meaning that you're likely to pass that algebra class with a B or a C if you got a 22 on the ACT math test, and you're likely to pass that sort of like history or psychology, sort of social studies class if you got a 22 on reading. The highest benchmark is science, that's 23. And I'm actually kind of curious, let me know in the chat, is anyone here planning to go into STEM? That's the acronym: science, technology, engineering, or math. Do we have any aspiring STEM students here? If so, you're going to look for a different benchmark. Those programs are typically a little bit harder than humanities and social sciences programs, and so for that, your average math and science result on the ACT needs to be a 26 or higher in order for you statistically to have a likely chance of getting a B or C in your freshman year math and science classes. And please, again, I'm not trying to say that like if you're going for STEM and you got a 25 on your ACT math and science tests, that you're going to fail and you might as well, grab the futon in your parents' basement and cozy up because you're going to live there forever. No. People still pass if they get a lower than the benchmark. And there are people who got D's or F's who met the benchmark. There's always going to be outliers. So please don't give up and abandon your dreams just because you didn't hit one of these numbers. But it is interesting to know that across tens of thousands of students, this is what the statistics come out to. If you can hit a certain score on the ACT and you're a statistically average individual, you can be pretty confident of getting a B or a C in your corresponding college classes. So if you're far below the mark, then that doesn't mean to give up. It means you got to do some work in the meantime to try to, build up the gap. Either study for the ACT some more and take it again, or do some other things. I'll give you some advice in just a moment. So that's a quick look at the benchmark, and if you saw them on your score report and didn't know what they were, hopefully that clears it up, and you can start to make sense of those numbers. Because you can look at your individual section scores, compare them to these benchmarks that are on the score report, and see statistically how likely you would be to pass a college freshman year class. There's a few folks here doing some aerospace. So Dave's daughter's going to do some astrophysics. Awesome. Haven's doing some engineering or science. There's a couple of people here going up into the sky. Roberts wants to do some aerospace, and Jay Wascow isn't quite sure, but is doing electrical engineering. Very nice. I myself did computer science. I double majored in computer science and English, so I tried to have like a balance between both sides of the brain, and I can attest that the general requirements that I needed to get for my Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, like the math and science, was not only like more intense, but there was a lot more of it than the requirements I had to satisfy for my BA in English. So there is a marked difference, and personally I can attest to the validity of these benchmarks because you do need to be a lot more on your game to pass those introductory freshman classes if you're in the sciences. So that's awesome to see so many of you guys are going for it. Okay, so now here's the printed student report that I mentioned earlier. You can click on the link in your online report to see this. You can see it's really cool because it shows you all in one row your composite score as well as all of your individual section scores. And on top of that, it shows you where each of your section scores compares to the benchmarks. So now you understand what this means. So if we take a look, for example, at this imaginary student, they got an 18 in science. And that is represented by this green highlighted rectangle there. You can see that that is below the benchmark. You may remember for science, the benchmark was a 23. So if you're getting an 18 in science, then that's an indicator that on average, people who get 18s in science are not likely. They're not at a 50% likelihood of getting a B or a 75% likelihood of getting a C in the corresponding freshman year science class that they will likely be taking. So you can either do some more work and take the ACT again and try to get your science score up, or another option is to try to make up the gap with schoolwork. So if you were, for example, planning not to take a science class in your senior year, then when you get this result, you can be like, hey, maybe I should actually elect to take a science class, to take the future into my own hands and try to ensure my own success. So that way, instead of like feeling bad about it, which I know is sort of the temptation, is like, oh, this is supposed to make me feel bad, like I can't succeed as a freshman. Like, no, the point here is not to make you feel bad, but to let you know that there is still something that you can do to improve your odds of doing well your first year of college. Wow, MadZone has some awesome results here. I got a 27 my first time, and I just got my April report and got a 33. Jeez, MadZone, very nicely done. Well, I think you're all set for these benchmarks, MadZone, now that you've got a 99th percentile ACT score, so congratulations. Going up 6 points is incredible, and I applaud your hard work. That must be a really, really good feeling. So let's take a look next at your detailed results. This is a little bit further down the printed report. I really like this a lot because in addition to giving you the overall score for each section, it actually tells you how you did on all the individual areas. So we look, for example, at this student, they got a 19 in math, but you can see they actually pretty much rocked number and quantity questions. So really fundamental questions about numbers. But they had a really tough time with stats and probability. Geometry was about 50-50, and some improvement was still possible in algebra and functions. So if you get this sort of report, it tells you, let's say if you get like a math workbook for the ACT, or if you're an online prep live student and you're trying to decide like which questions to practice in your online resources, this tells you which types of questions you're supposed to focus on. So it's nice. Please don't overlook this report, especially if you're planning to take the ACT again, because it helps you figure out where you should be spending your time studying, and that allows you to make an efficient use of your time. There's categories for English as well and for reading. So these are actually the same category names that are used in the online Prep Live class. So if you are an online Prep Live student, then it's very easy for you to figure out which question types you should be studying, because your practice questions in your online resources will use the exact same names as the ACT score report. Of course, that's because the ACT is the person or is the group that made the course, so it's coming straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Okay, so that's a quick look at the detailed results. Let's go back here to your main score report. So we took a look at our composite score at the top. We clicked on this link to see that score summary that we just checked out. Now let's scroll further down the report. So down here we see a couple of interesting areas which I want to explain in a bit more detail in today's presentation. One of them is your writing score. So this is out of 12, and you get a score on each of these different areas. The ideas and analysis, development and support, organization, and then language use and conventions. Each of those is also out of 12. So the way that those work is that basically they're averaged up. So you get a score from 2 to 12 on each of these areas, and then the average is your overall writing score. A lot of students ask, how does this factor into my ACT score? And the answer is it doesn't. Your composite score back at the top here has no impact from your writing if you took the writing test, because the writing test is optional, so it's separate from the overall ACT composite score. But what the writing score does do is it factors into your English and language arts score. So this is not part of your composite score, but it does give you a measure, again from 1 to 36, on how well you did on English, reading, and the essay. So that's one way that you can kind of combine it with some of your other sections to get a sense of how it fits in to your overall ACT. Then there's also the STEM score down below that. This is the average of your math and science scores. And the purpose of the STEM score is to compare it to that 26 STEM benchmark. So if you're at a 26 or higher here, that means you have, statistically speaking, on average, a 50% chance of getting a B or a 75% chance of getting a C in your freshman math and science classes. That is, again, only if you're going into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Otherwise, your benchmarks are a little bit lower, 22 for math, 23 for science. Now, there's a good question here from Robert. Robert's wondering, how do you become an online prep live student? That's a good question. So you can actually sign up just on the TestMaker's website. When you sign up to register for the ACT, you can sign up for a class at that time. If you've already registered for the ACT, you can add on the online prep live program to your registration. You don't need to reschedule or retake the test if you don't want to. So yeah, it's just through the ACT TestMaker's website where you just signed up for the ACT. You can also sign up for online prep live. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later on. Anne's also wondering, is it feasible to go from a 31 to a 34? And I'm sure that all of you here have some variation of that question, right? Probably everyone here is wondering, like, is it feasible to go from insert my score here to insert score I want to get here? And the answer is always yes, it is absolutely feasible. The caveat, though, is it might not be feasible in a certain amount of time. So sometimes students arbitrarily restrict their time frame. So they'll start studying for the ACT like 3 weeks out and be like, well, can I raise my score 7 points in 3 weeks? And the answer is, well, you can probably raise your score 7 points, but whether you can do it in 3 weeks, that I can't tell you. Everybody learns at a different speed. So some people need more time, some people need less time. If you're someone who needs more time, that's fine. You just got to give yourself the time that you need. So my blanket answer is yes, but make sure that you give yourself enough time. And if you're not where you need to be when your test date comes up, then postpone your test. Don't take the test if your practice test scores aren't where you wanted them to be. Instead, push the test date back and keep on studying. There's some other scores down here, the Understanding Complex Texts score and the Progress Toward Career Readiness. So the complex texts, this is a function of, it's kind of like a subscore out of your reading performance. So that gives a sense of how well you do on particularly difficult passages. Now the other one here, the Progress Towards Career Readiness, that's what I want to chat with you a little bit about, because you may remember on the ACT doing a sort of career inventory. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about that and how it can be used, to help you figure out your objective. I can say that personally, let me actually go up here to where the career stuff starts. Right here. Personally, I would have really loved to do something like this back when I was in high school, because I went to college and I really pretty much had no idea what it was that I really wanted to do. And I had heard that, you can just go to college and sort of mess around. And that's kind of true and kind of not. So yes, you can just take a smattering of different classes and hope that something really jumps out at you. But on the other hand, you don't really have that much time. And if in your freshman year there's nothing that particularly leaps out at you, then you might end up with some random major that was just like, well, the most fun thing I took was sociology, so let's major in it. And then you graduate with a degree in sociology, and then now there's really nothing to do. So you graduated, you got your degree, you're not that passionate about it, there's no particular jobs in it, and you're not sure what you're supposed to be doing there. So you got all this debt to pay off and no real direction. So it's okay, definitely, to experiment with different things in college, but I would advise strongly against just going to college having no idea. What I did was, and this was really stupid, so please don't do this, I always like to play video games, so I was like, I'll major in, computer science, because that's got to do with computers, and computers are what I play games on. Not a very sensible decision. That's like, majoring in physics because you like to look at things through microscopes. It really isn't, a very sound move. I liked reading and writing, so I also got a degree in English because that was just fun. So I got, 2 degrees kind of for fun. I ended up not really liking being a computer programmer, shockingly. Enjoying video games does not necessarily mean that you want to write software. Who would have thought? But it would, if I had been able to take some time up front and have a career inventory like this one, I actually might have been able to figure out that there were some other jobs that I could have been interested in. So I'm obviously happy where I ended up. I kind of stumbled into a job teaching for Kaplan more or less by accident, and it ended up being perfect because I love teaching and I love standardized tests, and so I ended up doing okay. But you have to be always very careful taking advice from people who ended up getting lucky, because for every person like me, there's 100 other people who had no direction when they got to college and they were unlucky and they didn't stumble into a really great job, and you're not going to hear from them because they're not going to be here teaching a class. You have to be very, very careful listening to advice from lucky people because it makes you think that if you just, do whatever, you end up doing well. So the idea behind this inventory is that on the test you answered some questions, or you can also do this online, you answered some questions about your interests. And what this will do is it will give you a sense of what you like to work with. So there's 4 different dimensions. Do you like to work with data? Do you like to work with things? Do you like to work with ideas? Or do you like to work with people? And of course, it's not an all or nothing. You can have a combination of the two. So in this particular example, you can see that this person really enjoys working with people and with data, and then it gives them a smattering of jobs that involve working with people and data. So being a financial manager, being a manager of training or education, being a travel guide, etc. Me personally, I definitely like working with ideas and with people. So, I could have looked into some jobs that are in that vein, and maybe I would have actually ended up being pretty good at those. So like now looking back, I'm like, man, maybe like going into law would have been cool because you're working with ideas and you also have to like work with people. Like that would have been something interesting, but I really didn't even, think about that. I also like working with data. Pretty much everything but things I like. I am like the least handy person who has ever lived. So I absolutely can't stand working with things. Everything else is okay. So working with data and people, that would be something like an accountant, right? So you have the data, which is the person's financial information, and then you have to work with the person to give them the best possible tax results. It wasn't even on my radar when I was going to college that maybe I could be an accountant. I was like, oh, accountants, those are boring people. Don't want to be one of them. And that was pretty much all the thought that I gave to it. But if I had gone about it a little bit more scientifically, that could have been a career I would have at least pursued, at least tried to take an accounting class, like just to see if that might be something that interested me. And of course, I'm not saying I regret what ended up happening. I'm really, really happy to be a teacher. This is like the funnest job I could have ever imagined having as a kid. But still, I got very, very lucky to be here, and working with an inventory like this one could have helped me make a little bit better choices in college than just, I like to read, so I'm going to major in English, and I like playing video games, so I'm going to major in computer science, which again, you kind of have to agree are really, really bad ways to make decisions about what to major in an $86,000 college degree. So that's the idea here, and I urge you to take a look at this area. So see where you fall in the spectrum, consider the jobs there, also explore. If you go to the website, you can actually click around the different areas to see like, well, what does it mean to work with things and ideas? What kinds of jobs entail that? So even if you got, slightly different results in the inventory than what you'd expect, or the results that came back aren't exactly the kind of jobs you'd like, look around the vicinity and just consider what your options might be, because one little thing of like, hey, maybe I would like to be a travel agent, like one little, experiment, like if I had been like, hey, maybe being an accountant would have been cool, that can utterly change what you end up pursuing. All right, now there's another thing here that you can check out. It's called the interest major fit. So if you indicated that you're particularly interested in a certain major, this inventory shows you how good of a fit you are with that major. And I want to be careful about this because I don't want to discourage you. Like, if this shows that you're not a good fit for that major, I don't want you to be like, oh, well, I wanted to be accounting, but I'm apparently a low fit, so I guess I should give up on my dreams. Like, no, if you really want to do it, if you're passionate about it, please, by all means, go for it. But it's a nice way to see, like, how well does what I think I want to do fit with my interests in general. And if it's low, then maybe you can research that job a little more, see what it really entails, and maybe realize like, hey, I actually hate reading complicated stuff, and I'm not a really big fan of like logic puzzles. So maybe going into law isn't really the smartest thing. I just thought it would be like, standing up in front of a courtroom and making arguments. But now that I realize that you have to like read, 300 pages of complex laws and analyze them and interpret them, it doesn't seem that appealing to me anymore. So you want to do some research in case you are a low to medium fit, and really make sure that you know what the job entails to decide that like this inventory is correct or incorrect. Now I'm going to pause here because I see a lot of really great questions coming in about scores. One person asked, so Liz had asked, I got a 34 my first time taking the ACT, but considering the schools I want to apply to and only getting a 9 on the essay, I'm considering retaking. That's an interesting point, Liz. Honestly, a 9 on the essay is pretty solid. So if you have a 34, which is a 99th percentile score, sure, it never like hurts to retake, but you got a pretty good shot with a 34. So I would give it a shot unless you are really, really paranoid about that 9. Not all schools even care about the essay. I wouldn't let you, convince yourself that like you're in really terrible shape, because with a 34 and a 9, you're actually in really, really good shape compared to most of your competitors. Now, G. Vosby says, I'm in a slower math class at my school, so I haven't learned a good portion of the things that are used in the test. So my math score wasn't as high as I would have liked. Any recommendations on how I can improve my score? That is a really tricky question. So obviously it's nice if you've taken the classes in high school. So that would be the first step. So hopefully you will have studied algebra, algebra 2, and geometry by the time you took the ACT. So if you can take those classes in your last year, go for it. If it's possible to study some of this math in summer school, then if that's a possibility, and if it fits your schedule, I would recommend that as well. I know you guys are always think like, oh, well, every time someone asks, what should I do? Boris says, take a class. This is one of those cases where I would say, actually, my first step would be to make sure you have that education from high school on the material. Now, after that, then yes. Again, I would just suggest prepping, either taking a class or studying out of a book to make sure that you're prepping exactly what the ACT tests, and you're not spending your time studying math that isn't actually going to be assessed on the exam. So first, you learn it in school by, with a course, and then you prep for it specifically for the ACT. And there's a good question also from Kathy. Is there a big difference in opportunities with a score of 34 versus 35? Honestly, I'm just going to give you a flat no. So hopefully that's good news for you if you really had your heart set on the 35, but you got a 34. Those are both 99th percentile scores. So they're both in the top 1% of ACT test takers. Now, obviously, a 35 is like higher up. It's a higher fraction of a percent, but it's still pretty good. So you're in really, really good shape with those scores. I mean, just apply and go wild. All right, let's take a quick look now at the options here. I wanted to show you this link on the screen, actprofile.org/login. So I was mentioning the website earlier. So this is what I was talking about, and it's a great site. Again, this is just, for me personally, just the experience I had where I made really, really, lackluster choices about what to study in college based on pretty much no actual reasoning whatsoever. I definitely encourage this because it can really make a difference in making the most out of your college education. So if you check this site out, it'll give you a sense of what your options are after school. You can check out that career map with those 4 different zones and just click around and see what the different options are. It can help you figure out what you might be interested in studying. And the nice thing here I want to mention too is it helps you actually consider schools. So you can do a search for schools by a bunch of various factors. For some people, location matters. Some people really want to be a certain distance away from home, or they want to be close to home, or they want to go somewhere warm, or they're sick of the warmth and they want to go somewhere where there's snow. So you can search by location. And then obviously all these other various factors like what's the type of school, what can you major in, you can compare costs. So this is really nice because it can help you find scholarships, and it can also help you figure out which schools are right for you based on the things that you want to study. So I recommend checking out this site. It's a good free resource that can help you make some good decisions about where to go to school and what to study when you actually get there. So you can see an example here of what you might see on the website. There's these 4 sectors, right? Working with data, working with things, working with ideas, and working with people. So you can kind of figure out based on which things you like to work on, which jobs exist in the intersection of those different areas. And again, there's different ways you can search. So you can search for a major group, meaning if I major in XYZ, what jobs are applicable to that major. And you can also search for things that match the personal interest inventory that you took or can take on the website to learn more about the things that might be good fits for you specifically. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to go back actually to one of the slides that we saw earlier. This was the two different dimensions of determining what a good ACT score is. So the main thing that we've been talking about so far is the second one, which is your future success. This is sort of like the more in-depth, more complex way of analyzing your score. You know, how did I hit the benchmarks that mean I'm likely to get a B or a C in my freshman year classes? Am I going to major in something that matches my interests that I could actually have a job in? But I want to talk a little bit about step number one as well. Like, does this score hit my target college and universities? So for this, I'm going to ask you guys, tell me please in the chat, what was the target score that you were hoping to hit for the schools that you were particularly interested in applying to? I'm kind of curious what people were at when they took this last ACT and what they were hoping to see on their score report. Sometimes people kind of take a guess. I've seen a lot of students who just always go for like a 36, or will say I want to get at least a 33 because they know that's the 99th percentile. But one thing that you can do to make sure that you actually need to get as high of a score as you think you do is look into the schools that you want to apply to and look for this 25th to 75th percentile range. All right, so I'm going to explain this because this is not particularly obvious how this works. But that's the way that schools will typically tell you what ACT scores incoming students have. So if you were to see something like this, like 24 to 28, this range of numbers, what that actually means is that 25% of people who matriculated into that school, so 25% of incoming freshmen, had lower than a 24. It also means that 25% of incoming freshmen had a 28 or higher. So if you think about it, what that means is that if you can get a 28 or higher for this particular school, then that means that you'd be like in the top 25% for the students who actually got into that school last year. Conversely, if you got, say, like a 23 or a 22, you'd be in the bottom 25% of students who went into that school last year. And it's important to interpret these numbers correctly. The top number represents your target score for that school, because if you can hit that number or higher, then that means that you're going to be in the top 25%. So that means you're a very competitive candidate relative to the people who actually end up going to that school. So that's how you determine your target. If you're not sure what your target is yet, or you're just going for the highest score possible and then trying to figure out, is my score good enough, look at some schools that you would consider going to and see what that 75th percentile number is. The opposite is, let's say that you have a dream school and you couldn't quite hit their 25th percentile number. Let's say you got a 23, so you couldn't quite make it. You should still apply. Okay? It's a reach school because you're in the bottom 25%, but you have to think about it. Fully a quarter of the people at that school have that score or lower. So that's, not the majority, but it's a pretty darn big minority. So please, please, please don't give up if you can't get the bottom number. Still go for it. All we're saying here is that your target should be the top number. This is a very ambitious group. I see most folks are going for like a 30 to a 34. Excellent. So if you're going for scores that high, then there's a chance that you might not get those scores, right? You got to reach for the stars, and sometimes you don't get all the way to the stars. You just end up making it on the moon, right? Please don't give up. You should still apply to those schools. Even if you only have a 25% chance of getting into any one of these schools, if you apply to like 4, 5, or 6 of them, the odds of getting into them all are very small. But the odds of not getting into any are also very small, right? If we know our probabilities, we know that that's going to be something like 3 to the 3/4 to the 6th power, which is a very, very small number. So you're likely to get in somewhere as long as you apply to a decent number of places that would be considered a reach for you. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit because sometimes people get discouraged and they feel like if they don't retake the ACT and they don't do better, they can't get into the schools. And that's not actually true. Getting into one school is still possible, even if it's unlikely. And if you can apply to a bunch of reach schools, then it actually starts to become likely you will get into at least one of them. All right, so that was a quick look at how to decide, did I get a good score or not? So now we have to answer the other question, which is, should I retake the ACT? All right, so here are some of the feelings that people typically go through, and let us know in the chat if any of this resonates with you as you're trying to figure out whether you should retake your test. Okay, so let's say you didn't quite hit that 75th percentile range to get into the school of your choice. You're thinking, well, should I take the ACT again? And then you might think like, oh goodness, that's tempting fate. Like, what if I do even worse? I shouldn't do it. Oh, well, but maybe I could do better. Oh, but maybe I'm going to do even worse. So how do I make this decision? Going around and around and around this loop, like you're running on a hamster wheel, is not going to help you. You need to have a concrete way of making that decision. So what I want to do here today is share with you some facts, some nice, concrete, hard numbers that can hopefully help you decide if it's a good idea for you specifically to retake this test. So one question you should ask yourself is, am I meeting the target requirements of my schools that I want to apply to? Obviously, if the answer is yes, you're good to go. If not, the next question you should ask yourself is, were there any specific problems that I had on test day? Did you mess up filling out the grid? Were you sick or just not feeling your best? Did you have like an unusually severe bout of test anxiety? So if you had any of those factors, that actually should make you more inclined to retake the test, because if you can not have those physiological factors affecting your performance the second time, then you can maybe get a better score. Now there's a good question here. Tej is asking, if I take an ACT my sophomore year, will it count for colleges? The answer is yes. An ACT score is good for 5 years. You can take it as a freshman if you want to and get it out of the way. Then when all your friends are stressing out about it in 11th grade, you can laugh, laugh, laugh all day long because you got it taken care of and don't have to worry about it anymore. So yeah, it counts for a long time. People generally take it their junior year just because that's like about as long as you can wait and still have a second chance at it while getting the maximum amount of high school education under your belt. But because it's good for such a long time, you can definitely take it early if you want to. And I see most of you guys are saying that you are considering taking the test again. So that's because maybe you decided that either your score just doesn't fit your target, or maybe you had some problems on test day. And even if you didn't have any particular problems on test day, if you're really concerned about hitting your target score, it becomes more tempting to consider retesting. Well, here's an interesting fact, right? A lot of students actually take the test more than once. So in 2015, 45% of students tested 2 or more times. A lot of people are afraid, like, oh, will it look bad if I take the test again? The answer is not really, because plenty of people do it. Almost half of people take the ACT twice. For me, I didn't take the ACT, I took the SAT, and I took it twice. And I was fine. I got into a good school, got a good scholarship, like I told you about. It was all okay. So it's really not a bad thing to take it 2 times. Not the end of the world at all. Furthermore, you might be afraid, like, well, what if my score goes down? And actually, most people's score either stays the same or goes up. You can see that a slight majority of people, 57%, see an increase in their score the second time they take the ACT. Now, I will note, as a point of logical order here, this is a correlation. It is not a causation. It does not mean that taking the test again caused their score to go up. Chances are what caused their score to go up was being more familiar with the test, not being as nervous, and most importantly, doing some extra preparation before they took the test. So the thing that helped me ultimately break the 90th percentile on my test was that I prepped the second time because my parents made me, and I did not prep at all the first time. So of course my score was going to go up. Only 22% of people, so less than a quarter, end up seeing a decrease. And again, it's not causal. It's not like taking the test again caused their score to go down. Chances are what caused their score to go down was not really doing any significant amount of prep in between their first time taking it and the second time taking it. So as long as you make sure that you're in the category of people who takes their preparation seriously and works really hard at it after your first score, then you can have a much lower than 22% chance of seeing a decrease and a much higher than 57% chance of seeing an increase because you're actually controlling the factors that determine what you get. It's not just totally random. Now there's a good question here from Lori. Lori's wondering, look, is it worth possibly risking a 33 on math to try to get a higher score in English while applying to be an engineering major? The main thing I would take a look at, Lori, is whether the schools that you're applying to allow you to superscore. So superscore is a bit of a casual term. It means that the school is willing to accept your best result on a given test. So let's say that we'll just do 2 sections for comparison. Let's say that on test 1 you got a math score of 33, and I don't know what your reading score was, but let's say your reading was like a 24 or something like that. And let's say that on test 2, your math dips a bit down to 31, but you got your reading up to, let's say, 29. All right, so now notice your math score did go down, but what a lot of schools are willing to do is they're willing to take that 33 you got in math from test 1 and the 29 in reading that you got in test 2. In other words, these schools are not committed to taking a single ACT result in one package, but they're willing to, pick and choose the best ones. Not every school does, okay? So it's not a thing you can 100% count on, but if it's something that you're concerned about, look into the schools you're going to be applying to, contact them if necessary, and see if they do this. Because if they do, then that 100% completely eliminates any worries you may have on this matter, and you can take the test again, try to improve your reading and English scores without any worries whatsoever about it negatively impacting your college admissions chances. Linda's saying, I read if you retest on ACT, you only go up 1 point. Ah, Linda, I'm so glad you read that and that you shared that with us, because I can tell you that that is incorrect. So if you retest on the ACT and you work really hard at it, you're going to go up a lot more than 1 point. Statistically, on average, people might go up only 1 point because people, on average, don't prep as much as they should. But if you are not part of the camp of people who's simply taking the test a second time just for laughs and doing, zilch and nada in the meantime to actually take control of the test and improve your performance, then you're likely to get a much more than 1 point increase. Like I said, it's not a causal thing where like taking the test again caused people's scores to improve. That's a correlation. The causation really underlying it is the hard work that the people put in to actually learn the material and get good at the skills that the ACT tests. All right, let's take a look at take a look at the online Prep Life program, because I know some of you are considering taking a class, and see what some of the different features are and help you decide if it's a good decision for you. I'm actually going to skip a little bit to the end of it because I know some of you guys are concerned about price, and indeed, live classes can definitely be a significant cost. You'll notice that for online Prep Live, it's actually really affordable. So if you're going to do a 6-week subscription, so if you're going to just study for 6 weeks leading up to the ACT, it is about $100, which for live instruction is very nice. If you, still find that that is a lot of money, and if you're low income, like I said before, the class is totally free if you qualify for an ACT fee waiver. So I honestly don't know why we don't have like thousands of students in the class taking it for free, because if I had a fee waiver for the ACT, the first thing I would do is I would sign up for Online Prep Live, because it is free live instruction backed up by thousands of practice problems that I don't have to pay for. It's a really, really great program, and it's our way of, giving back to basically the community of American students. Education is really expensive in this country. College costs tens of thousands, over $100,000 for most folks. Prep classes can be several hundreds of dollars. So we're really happy that we can offer something that is $100 or free to people who really need it and give them high quality instruction for the ACT. Now, for those of you who are going to be prepping a little more out, you can sign up for a 12-week subscription or a 24-week subscription. And please make sure that you use this code RETEST to get a discount on the price of that subscription. So if it were me, and you're wondering, like, would a 6-week subscription be enough? Personally, yes, if you can commit the time to it. Because 6 weeks, that gives you about 3 to 4 weeks to get through all of the required classes and all the live sessions and do all the assignments, plus then 2 weeks to prep on your own, take a couple of practice tests and review them, and then do that last minute patching up on your own before you take your test. If you're juggling the ACT with something else, so if you're trying to study for the ACT and do summer school at the same time, or you're taking this class during the school year, so you're studying for the ACT and going to high school at the same time with your 4 AP classes and homework every night, then you might want to space it out over a little bit of a longer period so that you don't have to go through all of the live class sessions quite as aggressively. There's a good question here from JMB. If I don't report all my ACT scores, can they find out about the ones I don't report? Yes, but again, a lot of schools will just super score. So if they find out about the ones you don't report, it's not necessarily going to hurt you for those schools. And then Diane's wondering, what scores are typically needed for academic scholarships? So typically it is an ACT score or an SAT score. The level that you have to hit is going to be different for each school. I can just tell you the school that I went to, it was a 90th percentile score. So the criteria for my full ride was either an SAT or an ACT score in the 90th percentile, and you had to be in the top 10% of your class. And if you satisfied both of those criteria, you would get full tuition. If you got one or the other but not both, so you had a 90th percentile score but you weren't in the top 10% of your class, it was like, there was a gradient. You can get like 2/3 tuition, and then you could also get a half tuition scholarship. This was way back in the day, obviously, like in 2003, so I don't know if Case Western still does any of that, but you definitely want to take a look at the websites of the schools that you're interested in, go to the scholarship area, and then they'll spell out exactly all the rules for which test to take and what scores you need to hit. There can be other scholarships, by the way, so it's not all based on the ACT or SAT, but those are, of course, the two main determining factors and typically result in the biggest scholarships. There's a question again from JMB. Can you address the subject of reporting only your best score to schools you're applying to? Yes. So JMB, I saw you had a question about this earlier. You need to look at the schools that you want to apply to. So you want to do some research into the schools that you want to be applied to, the schools you hope to be a student at. Go to their websites and figure out, do they super score? If they do, that means that they will take your best individual section test score across multiple administrations of the ACT. If they don't super score, then that means that you have to get, all of your good scores on the one same ACT administration. And believe it or not, that's all there is to it. So if they super score, then it's a little bit easier. If they don't super score, it's a little bit harder, and that's pretty much it. So if you do enroll in ACT Online Prep Live, what exactly do you get? So one of the nice things about it is that it is live instruction, and it is all based on official ACT questions. So it's the way the partnership works is that the ACT provides all of the practice problems, which are questions that are written by the test makers themselves. So they're totally realistic practice. And then Kaplan provides the live teaching. So we have our best teachers going on camera, teaching the material, doing our best job to make it as simple and clear as possible, and giving you guidance on how you should study and prep outside of class to raise your score by the most in the limited amount of time that you have. What's nice about it too is that if you do miss a lesson or there is no Algebra 1 lesson happening at the time that you want, there's also on-demand options. We record all of our lessons and then we post the best iterations of each lesson into an online archive. So that way, you can check out a video of Arthur teaching Algebra 1 to a live class that went really well and that we added to the archive. And then so obviously it's not happening live in that case. You're not there as an actual student, but you can see what it looked like to real students who attended that session when Arthur taught it. And so that's a good way that you can make sure you can attend all the sessions, or at least see all the sessions that are interesting to you, even if you can't make them all live. There's also on your Online Prep Live homepage a personalized study plan that tells you what you should practice and when you should practice it. And also you have access to Kaplan ACT experts, not just during class, but outside of class. There is a moderated forum in which you can post questions like, I wrote this essay, can you give me some feedback on it? Or I did this question, can you explain to me why C is wrong? Or I did this question and I don't know where the 2x came from. So you can post those questions and then Kaplan teachers will sign on and answer them for you. So you can get homework help or just any kind of general assistance outside of class in addition to the live classroom sessions with the teachers. There's also, of course, thousands of practice questions and quite a few practice tests you can take on your own with explanations for all the questions so that you can practice the resources or practice the strategies that you learn in class, try to apply them on your own on the practice tests and practice questions, and then review with our explanations to make sure that you're on the right track, or if there's a gap in your strategy, to fix it and get it right before test day. And again, this is free. I can't say this enough times. This is totally 100% free if you registered for the ACT with a fee waiver. So if you did that, there should be zero thinking required. Please go right now and sign up for Online Prep Live. It literally does not cost you a penny, and you get free live instruction with thousands of practice problems to help you prepare for the ACT. If you've ever done any kind of shopping around for prep classes, then you know how crazy this is to have a live course that is totally free. That's just not something you can find anywhere. So please don't miss this opportunity to take the future in your own hands and ensure your own success in this important exam. There's a really good question here from Irene, who is wondering, do Ivy Leagues prefer the ACT over the SAT or vice versa? And the answer is not really. It varies from school to school. All I would do is I would just check the test or the college's website and see what their admission requirements are. So most schools will take either the ACT or the SAT. And if so, just use whichever one you want. There are some schools, though, who will only take one test or the other. In that case, if you want to apply to that school, you have to take that particular test. These schools are in the minority, but they do exist. So that's why it's important to check the admissions requirements. If you are set to take the ACT, but Dream School XYZ requires the SAT, then you either have to decide not to apply to Dream School XYZ, or you have to take the SAT either in addition to or instead of the ACT. So that's the important thing you want to check there. But it's not like there's some secret Jedi mind game going on here. There's no school that's like posting on their website, we accept either ACT or SAT scores, but then secretly they're a cabal in the dark underground, any students who apply to us with an ACT score have no chance because we secretly prefer the ACT, SAT, No, that doesn't happen. If a school takes both, they're both fine. There's a question here from Beatrice. I already used all the resources or all the chances lifetime with the ACT. Do you think they would allow me to take the test again if I request? It's a really good question, Beatrice. So if you've taken the ACT the maximum number of times already, like 12 times or whatever the crazy number is, then I would just apply to college with the best scores that you possibly can and see what happens. If that doesn't work out and you're not able to get in, then what you really want to do is reassess what happened. Because you really shouldn't have taken the ACT 12 times if you weren't going to get your target score. You can take practice tests, you can see what you would get. You shouldn't have been surprised, on administration number 10 when you didn't get your target score, because you should have been prepping and you should have already known that you weren't going to hit the score that you wanted. In fact, that's something you should have probably known by about admission number 3. So you want to really reevaluate what you're doing right now and why you ended up taking the test so many times and didn't get the score that you needed. And if you are going to request for an exception from the ACT test makers, one thing you're definitely going to need to provide is a good explanation of why you took the test such a large number of times and didn't get your score, and what you're going to do differently to make sure that you get that score in the future. So my guess is that you didn't take practice tests, because if you had taken practice tests, you would have known you weren't getting your target score, so you wouldn't have taken the ACT again. Or you just didn't do prep in between your administrations and you just sort of hoped that, taking it a bunch of times would get your score to go up. So you want to be prepared to tell the ACT, look, I made a mistake. I didn't practice as hard as I should have, or I took practice tests, but I disregarded the results. So now I'm going to do XYZ to make sure it's different. Now I'm going to take a prep program. I'm going to work really hard and actually learn how to solve these questions. I'm going to take practice tests and review them. And if I'm not getting the score that I need to on my practice test, I'm going to cancel my administration and keep studying until I get to where I need to be on my practice exams. So this time, I'm going to know going into my ACT that I can get a 24, 26, 28 because I've done the prep to get there and I have the practice test results to back it up. So you're going to need to express to the test makers very clearly that you understand where you went wrong and that you are not going to make that mistake by taking the test an extra time. Now, there's also a question here. Oh, sorry, that was just the question that I answered. No, there was a question I didn't answer from Taylor. How do you get a fee waiver? Excellent. This is when you sign up for the ACT. You can see the requirements for the fee waiver. It's very similar to financial aid requirements. So if you can demonstrate your income is below a certain threshold, then the test makers will allow you to waive the fee for the SAT or for the ACT. There is a good question from JMB. I like this question a lot. So if schools can find out all your scores, why should you pay to have scores other than my best score reported? It's a really good question. And the answer is not that you're paying to report scores other than your best one. The answer is that you're paying the ACT test makers, or if you're taking the SAT test makers, to score your tests and report that result to schools. That's what you're paying them for, is you're paying them to score your test and report it. And if you take it multiple times, then they're obligated to have that all be included in the report. The purpose of that is very straightforward, right? It's so that colleges don't see oh, this person got a 33, but really they took the test again and got a 25. Colleges have a right to see that. So it's just a matter of what you're paying for is the right to take the test and get a score, and all those scores are logged. That's part of what happens when you get into this agreement with the test writers that you're going to take the test and they're going to score it for you and report the results. All right, folks, that'll do it for today. So thank you so much for attending this session. I really appreciated getting a chance to work with you here and answer some of your questions. I'll leave you here on this page, which shows some of the pricing. And also, actually, maybe smarter is to actually take a look, to go back to the page that had the URL. All right, this was, yeah, I'll type it up on the screen here on this page so you guys can see that. So it's online prep.act.org. Let me type that up here, and I'm sure that my colleagues are can type that into the chat for you guys as well. So it's online prep.act.org. So if you want some more information about the course, or if you want to go and enroll, this is where to go do it. And I just want to thank you again for coming. So it has been such a pleasure working with you guys and showing you some of the information about your ACT score report, helping you make the most out of that score report, and hopefully also showing you guys how you can make concrete decisions about what to do from here. Deciding whether you should retake the test or not, deciding what you should major in, and making sure that those choices are based on sound logic rather than guesswork. Thank you guys so much for coming. Please continue asking questions in the chat if you have them. We will stick around to answer them for a little bit longer. But for now, I want to congratulate those of you who got the score that you wanted. And if you didn't get the score that you wanted, I want to congratulate you too for working really hard, taking the ACT and giving it your best shot. And then I also am going to wish you the best of luck in your preparation for your next test day. Take care, everybody.